Hi, my name is Doug Roush, and I run the Client Analytics Group at Mercer. And my presentation today is titled Easing into Interactive, and we'll cover our experiences at Mercer in improving the adoption of dashboards to improving the quality of business decisions. Now, before I go into some of the content around how we're doing this, I want to give a little bit of context around what Mercer is. Mercer isn't necessarily a household name for most people. But we are a global consulting firm that started in Canada about 65 years ago. And since then, we've moved into about 40 countries around the world. We have more than 200 offices and 20,000 colleagues. So a pretty strong global footprint and about $4 billion of revenue. And our business is broken down into four segments. Talent, which is a business that helps advise our clients on what to pay employees, what is competitive pay in that marketplace, how to engage the workforce, how to retain talent. Our health business, which helps our clients put together competitive healthcare offerings and improve the health of the workforce, which helps reduce healthcare costs. Our retirement business, which helps to advise clients on designing competitive retirement plans, as well as computing the funding levels for pensions. And so we have quite a few actuaries that assist with that, and clearly they have a very precise way of looking at information that has presented us with some interesting challenges in what we're preparing and presenting to them. And lastly, our investments business, which really helps our clients understand where to invest their pension, and in some cases helps to what we call de-risk, which means really move to a more structured investment plan that helps to reduce the amount of time that our clients need to spend on worrying about where to invest their funds. So you can see here, many of our clients are some of the largest companies in the world, but we also have a large number of our clients have less than 5,000 employees, so some medium to small sized businesses as well. And lastly, again, sort of reiterating what I've said, there's 27,000 clients, large number of employees are working for these clients, and over 100 million people are affected by some of the advice that we give our clients today about the things I talked about. So moving into what my team does. So about a year ago, a client analytics team was formed really with the intent of working with our business leaders and our client teams and our finance group to come up with some actionable insights into client relationships and different financial metrics. The audience for this, there's about 5,000 people that have responsibility in selling to our clients or delivering work, and there's about 500 people that are supporting them. And so it's a pretty globally disparate group of people with different focuses, different skills, different responsibilities. And so that has presented some opportunities and some challenges in how we deliver information to them. Our business is changing. As I mentioned, some of the businesses we're in, while there's still a pretty strong consulting model for which has been in place since we started the company, there's many new product lines that are sort of a different operating model and a business model. And so those have required for definition of new metrics and for us to focus on understanding the underlying drivers of those businesses and their profitability. And so that has presented some challenges as well as to what we're rolling out. And so, as we talk about adoption, our audience is, many of them are very comfortable using online tools, and certainly at this point in time using technology and dashboards. But there's still some pretty key people and a relatively large number of them that really do prefer to get static reports, meaning they get something that they can print out, put in their filing cabinet, store on their computer, email to colleagues, make notes on, make some commentary about. And so this concept has really been sort of one of the key challenges in getting people to move to more of an online model, interactive and self-service, and getting people to use the tools to derive the information to make the decisions they need to do. Certainly from a timing perspective and expectations around delivering information, some of our leadership certainly wants to see information, new information that we're developing pretty rapidly, but our traditional IT delivery process tends to follow more of a waterfall process where there's an expectation to have very heavy, formal, thorough requirements defined up front before the tools are turned over to IT to develop. And so this has created a challenge that I'll talk a little bit about in a minute. And lastly, as we talk about improving adoption, for us, we really did not have a technology issue to solve as part of this. The work that we're doing is not about delivering or implementing new software or developing a major new set of data. We really have a pretty good infrastructure in place that helps to securely distribute content, and we have a global data warehouse, and we have some standard reporting. And so those issues were not really a big part of the problem as much as it was in delivering something that was relevant to people in a fashion that made sense to them. So as I move on, so one of the things I didn't mention is that, my background is IT. I come from a group that managed many of these tools from the IT side. And one of the interesting challenges that came from moving from IT to finance was that in some people's minds there was sort of an expectation that there would be a sort of a shadow IT group created in finance. And so that was not the intent at all. And so one of the concepts that we've talked about in trying to help articulate the differences between the new client analyst group and our IT group is based upon an article that was in the Harvard Business Review back in April that talked about, really in the context of big data, but I think this applies to what we're doing, which is more traditional business intelligence and dashboard delivery, which is separating out the work done in the lab versus what's done in the factory. And so if you think about sort of the traditional industrial model of people in the lab coming up with new ideas and testing them and iterating through many different ideas, many of them failing, but really testing many of them and getting feedback and seeing what really works. And having a good open sort of discovery process for getting to a point that you can deliver a product that actually resonates with your customers. And then once that's been well defined, and really tested, turning it over to the factory to basically mass produce it. And so these concepts, I think, are, as they've talked about in the article, it really do apply in many cases to the way data is analyzed and eventually turned over to IT. And so we talk about our client analytics group being the lab, really coming up with the new concepts and testing and iterating through different designs. And once that's been finalized, turning it over to IT to mass produce it. And so here's kind of one of the early examples that we went through for a dashboard in Tableau that was looking at employee utilization. And so the first draft of this was based upon a limited number of people explaining what they thought should be delivered in the dashboard. And using Tableau, we were able to create this, release it to a pilot group, and basically work with them over several weeks to get their feedback on what was working, what made sense, what other information was needed to kind of iterate through a few different designs to get to a final design that actually works quite well and gives people the information they need, gives them good variances to targets and year-over-year variances. And so there's a couple of sort of obvious benefits to this. I mean, clearly delivering something more rapidly and adapting to what people are saying is very helpful from the end user's perspective. But it also helps us with our relationship with IT, because now what we're presenting to them to basically build out in the factory is something that's been really thoroughly reviewed and tested, and is much closer to what a final product should look like compared to what the first iteration would be. And I think in the past, we probably would have provided them the first iteration and asked them to build it, and probably changed our minds several times during the development, which ends up being sort of an expensive proposition. So this concept has really helped with delivering information that is relevant to the users in a timely fashion. So a couple of other things that I wanted to talk about that are sort of unrelated to the actual development process, and this has really been a key focus of our group, because in the past, as I mentioned, there's been other initiatives that have delivered reports and dashboards and other information to our clients without there necessarily being a high level of adoption. And a lot of that is due to the fact that there wasn't as much focus as there should have been in these three areas. There tended to be a focus on what is the information that we think we need, and now let's build it out into the product, as opposed to having more robust conversations with the business about what processes are being supported by this information. So really discussing and documenting, what are the decisions that need to be made? What are the business processes? What are we trying to measure, and how does it relate to the firm's financial results? And lastly, what are the expectations around the results? Are there targets that should be applied to this information? Are there budgets? Are there offline or within a system expectations around what the results should be? And having that information up front really helps to inform what gets built. The next pillar in this slide talks about, what is the information that relates to that process? So are there metrics? Are there key performance indicators that relate to this business process? Certainly for our time-based business, utilization is a key measure. But some of our asset-based or product-based businesses, they may not have metrics predefined. And so if they're not, it really flags an area where the focus needs to be in improving the definition of what those metrics are. Related to that, what are the diagnostic measures that help to explain what's happening in the key metric, and where does that information come from? What level of aggregation is needed? So in other words, is it important to know what business or office the information is relevant to, or is it important to drill down to the employee, or perhaps the day or the time of the day? And so understanding what level of aggregation is needed to actually make a business decision is important to understand up front, clearly, for having that information available on the dashboard. And lastly, talking about what kind of behavior changes are needed to improve the adoption. Who are we delivering the information to? What is the expectation around their level of proficiency in using the tools, in understanding the metrics, in knowing what decisions they should be making? Some of this, for much of the business, clearly this is very straightforward, but for some of our new products and for some of our growth markets, it's not as inherent in the business operations. And so having the conversations about who should be receiving this, how they should receive it, and whether there's existing processes today to provide this information to leadership, perhaps offline or through Excel spreadsheets or other methods that may compete with the delivery of this dashboard. And so identifying processes or reports that need to be decommissioned is just as important to changing behavior as it is to rolling out the new tool. And lastly, how will we measure success? Is there a way to set a target around logins or number of people using it, or perhaps even just more importantly, is the information being discussed in leadership meetings where the actual business decisions are being made? So is it ingrained in the behavior of the business? So I want to drill down on that center pillar a little bit and just show a little bit how the process that we go through have been going through to help define the information needed. And so in this example, we're looking at a key financial category of information. Revenue is obviously a very critical component to all of our businesses. But the way that we derive revenue or earn revenue varies depending upon a variety of drivers. So our traditional consulting business might be based upon time entry, the number of billable hours that a consultant has entered. But there are new revenue streams that are perhaps based on other methods, such as assets under management and commission receipts on our healthcare plans. And so understanding not only what these drivers are, but also the relative importance to that particular business is an important part of the step in defining the information needed. The third column identifies the key performance indicators. So what are the KPIs that will, in a nutshell, summarize how well we're doing in this particular category? And certainly for our time-based business, utilization of employees, the billable time compared to their overall capacity is clearly number one on the list. But knowing that doesn't necessarily really help explain why and what are the drivers. So the last column here is identifying if utilization was higher than planned or lower than planned, what are the pieces of information that you would look to as a business leader and as a supervisor to understand why that's happening. Perhaps headcount is up or headcount is down. Perhaps people are on vacation or there are resources in the group that are reassigned to internal projects. So the kinds of information that would actually help diagnose why utilization is up or down are what the diagnostic measures are. And so including this as part of the process really helps to map out not only what is critically important to understand, but also as we start to deliver information and dashboards, we can put it in the context of what's shown as part of this overall mapping of the KPIs. The other thing that this helps us with is really with our design of the dashboards. And so here we're taking a really basic wireframe, but understanding that there's sort of a hierarchy between the KPI, what the diagnostic measures are, and the details that support that, we can start to frame up a layout of the way the dashboard look and start to review this with our clients before actually putting any effort into developing it. And so one of the concepts here is that within one page on the dashboard, we can see in the top left, what the KPIs are, how they're doing against target. So that gives us a sense for the high-level indicator and how we're doing. Is it good or bad compared to where we should be? If we're doing good or bad, help me understand what are the areas that are driving that. Is it particular career levels of individuals in the firm, or is it the more senior or the more junior? Are there certain geographies or certain businesses? So the diagnostic measures gives us a better sense of where to focus our effort in understanding and improving performance. And then the detail section shows where are the specific actions that need to be taken to improve performance. So this may be a list of employees, it may be a list of supervisors whose teams are underperforming, but it should be enough information to give leadership a course of action, either to make a phone call, schedule a meeting, or take other actions to help improve the performance. And then here's an actual dashboard that we've created for one of our key areas of measurement. So this happens to relate to time entry compliance. So this is the number of people that have entered their time within the time frame specified. So we look to have all employees put in their time by the close of business on Friday. And so this is, the top left is that KPI, percentage of people in that business. You can see that there's a trend of that over time. There's a blue bar at the top that indicates the range of targets. So we expect that they're between 85 and 95% of people are achieving this target. So you can see that there's certain weeks that they're getting into that target, many weeks that they're below it. So it helps to get a high-level picture of how we're doing against target. To the right of that is a listing by department and supervisor on who's achieving that target. So we can see pretty clearly which supervisors are contributing to the overall performance. And then below that are employee details. So knowing which department is out of tolerance and then knowing the people in that department helps management and supervisors actually take some action with this. Call up the employee, schedule some time with them, follow up with them on Thursdays and Fridays and make sure they're putting in their time. So it gives them something actionable to actually do. Now the next section relates to governance, and this is, for us, is probably the most important thing. I probably could have put this as one of the first slides in the deck, but it's not necessarily a very glamorous topic, but it is pretty critical to enforcing the change throughout the organization. And so having this structure in place, if you look on the right-hand side of the slide, certainly there's some foundational aspects to this that cut across all of our projects that we're working on, which is the process that we follow to develop the dashboards, the tools that we use, the access rights. These things are fundamentally defined up front, and all of our product teams basically work within that framework. But the teams themselves are accountable to an advisory team, and this advisory team is a representation of the key decision makers and change management authorities that can actually enforce the change. So not only who has the authority to make a decision about what metric should be on the dashboard, certainly those are important things to have management buy into, but also who's accountable for ensuring that these metrics are used, that they're used in the business meetings and the monthly management meetings, the annual budgeting process, the discussions with our client teams. These things are not easily enforced, and so it's important that management buy into that and that cascade down to the individual supervisors and teams. And so the advisory team is really critical to not only getting their buy-in and having them approve what's done, but also to turn around and ensure that the businesses and geographies are adhering to using these tools and really using them in the context of their business operations. So next is a pretty important thing that has actually been pretty heavily used very recently by our group, and it's about measuring the adoption. Some of this is something that I think that we've always done. I think what we've been doing better at more recently is having these discussions up front during the design phase. And so while some of this, such as who is the audience and how frequently they should be using it, is really important for the actual development process and required for understanding, who to actually literally give access to and build. In many cases, though, what's really important and perhaps not as clear up front is specifically what are the expectations for those people and how often they'll be using it and how they should be using it. And so having an understanding of that, having the discussions, taking the time up front to identify who those people are. Is it the most senior people on the client team? Is it the more junior people doing the actual work but not managing any staff? Understanding that will help us not only deliver a product that is probably best suited for their use, but it also helps us understand who in total is the target audience so that we know when we roll these dashboards out whether or not those people are using it. The frequency is also important to understand. Do we expect that they'll be in there daily or weekly or monthly? Perhaps it's a quarterly or annual thing. As I mentioned earlier, are there other sources of information that might be available to people that would perhaps not be defined the same way that the metrics are and are still available to them after the dashboard goes live? So understanding what should be decommissioned as part of that. And when we talk about delivering things, there's a very important point that we probably have had many, many discussions about preferences around, which is how do we tell people that information is available? I know that many people, when they get a notification from an automated email box, very quickly that becomes one of the rules that they set in their Outlook mailbox to delete that email whenever it comes out, because it's, for many people, they find it to be a nuisance. And so, understanding what the notification method is relates to adoption in the sense that we need to be able to measure not only when the information was available, but also when people were told about it. So certainly this concept is important to doing some of the measurement after we've launched a product. And so certainly these are things that we want to develop in parallel with the dashboard. So any new dashboard that we're rolling out, we look to have the adoption measurements defined up front and a dashboard built along with it in parallel, and then really clearly make sure these are published and broadly understood by the business leadership and the advisory team. And so there's several benefits to having this information, and clearly just understanding the expectations on who should use it and then being able to report on whether they are or not is certainly key to this, and it really helps us to inform leadership about the effectiveness of this. But I think more importantly are the items below that, which relate to certainly from a positive aspect, who are the power users? Like who are the people that are very highly engaged, they're finding the information valuable, they're using the tool all the time? Because those are the people that we want to talk to and hear from them. How is it they're using this information? Why do they find it valuable in the sense that, how are they using it to have discussions with their management team? What kind of actions are they taking with it? To the extent that we can document those, certainly anyone who's looked at Tableau's site knows that there's a ton of fantastic video testimonials around how people are using the tools. And certainly if you can't record it from a video, you can record quotes and other sort of stories that are relevant to the people in the field because it's their peers that are talking about it. So that's a great group to kind of nurture and have become your evangelists for the tools. And to a certain extent, they're probably one of the best audiences to talk about what should be improved in the dashboard and help prioritize changes, new information, new ways of delivering it. It's a great audience to talk to. Sort of on the flip side of that is, for the people that aren't using it, they really represent an opportunity to engage as well. Perhaps they were not trained well. They may be new employees and they weren't brought on board. Or there's very possibly that there's something missing in what we launched. Maybe there's a piece of information that's not accurate, or is just not available based upon that business in a particular geography. And in some cases, perhaps they're getting their information from somewhere else. And so, kind of getting an understanding from them on what's happening and why they're not using the tool is helpful information to have, and may help tailor future training, as well as kind of let people know that we're kind of watching and looking and know when people are using it and when they're not. That sometimes sends a message on its own. Decommissioning content certainly is not something that is our mission in life, but we certainly very, very rarely turn things off, even when we know that they're not being used. And so clearly it's wasted time and support if something is not being used. And so to the extent that we can deactivate things and decommission it and turn it off helps reduce the amount of support and reduces the clutter on people's screens. From more of a somewhat more of a technical perspective, but the usage patterns, when are people logging in, what are the peak times, these are the kind of things that help sometimes justify the purchase of additional hardware or software. Also helps us to do some sort of support scheduling so that we know when people need to be available to help our users around the world, given the global user base, and do some other optimization of some of the hardware and software. And then lastly, kind of a case scenario where people perhaps just are not they're in a role perhaps that is not relevant to this work anymore, or perhaps they've just are not going to use the tools. And so in a scenario where there's some constraint around the number of licenses available, it does help us to reclaim those licenses. And so the next slide is a couple of samples that I wanted to show. These are actual usage reports that we are producing for various dashboards. The first section here shows the number of unique people logging in, so it gives us a good trend of how many people are actually using it, regardless of kind of how many times they connect, just how many people in total. For scenarios we're expecting, X number of people to be in there every month. This gives us a sense of the number of unique people. The middle section is focused more about not only the people, but when they're using it. And so there's some interesting information here about not only what day and what time of the day and what is the peak usage, but when what we've added to this is the vertical bars, the gray bars show when people were notified about the dashboard. And so you'll see that pretty much when the email is sent out notifying people, that they pretty much log in when they're told that it's available. So that's one important piece of information, that's a pretty powerful notification. And in this case, it was coming from a colleague as opposed to a system-generated email. So it was coming from someone they knew, coming from someone they typically get information from. It was one of their finance analysts. And so clearly that had an effect, but you can see in some weeks people are actually logging into it before the email came out. So there's some interesting information here. And certainly when you go to the right-hand side, this is actually within a month. And you can see that really usage is highest at the end of the month. And this was meant to be something that gave people information throughout the month. And so something, certainly it's valuable at the last week, but something's missing in the in-between weeks because the information should be valuable to them throughout the month. So there's something here that we need to work on to help improve the value of the information during the month. And then on the right-hand side is providing a little bit more context as to what our expectations are for how many people should be using the tool. So in this case, you can see what's interesting here is that you see a trend from January of there's 10 people or 10 records created going up to 96 in June. And so this looks like, if you were to look at this isolated, you'd say this is fantastic. We have a tenfold increase of usage through this year, and that's something that we should be celebrating. But the reality is that the expectation is that it is the sort of the darker lines, the yellow lines behind that show what the expected usage was. And so in this case, this related to some use of our tools related to certain transactions that were created in other tools. And so what you can see is that a very small percentage of people are using it the way they should. And so, I've really, although this is not the greatest news, I think it's important that leadership understand this. I've never been sort of shy about sharing this kind of news because certainly leadership is making an investment in tools, and there's an expectation that people will use them. So even though this may not reflect well on certain parts of the business, it's something that's important for people to know. And it's important they have some context as to the usage compared to what the expectations are. And this, I can tell you, was actually something that was shared with leadership probably about a month ago. And within 2 weeks, our CEO was presenting this at an all-employee town hall, 20,000 people around the world. So it can be powerful and can be used in many different ways. In this case, it was used, in a very positive way to reinforce the importance of using these tools. And so the last section I wanted to go through was some pretty specific tips around how we're using Tableau to help improve adoption. And I mentioned earlier on that some of the user base are quite comfortable with and really most comfortable with having the ability to print out and email or physically print out reports. And so one of the rules of the road that we have is that really when we're creating dashboards, we make sure that the size is constrained to fit within a standard piece of paper. So for us, standard letter paper is a setting in Tableau, and it's a pretty straightforward thing. But what it has helped us to do is for those that want to still open this and set a filter and then share it with somebody, physically share it with them, make some notes on it possibly, or perhaps print it to a PDF and email it, it makes it very, very convenient for them to do that. And so we've noticed in the past that people who sometimes are not as comfortable with this technology will really shy away from using it because they don't know how to share what they've seen with somebody else. And so, even though Tableau provides some really cool ways to embed a URL in an email and send people information that has the same filters applied, in some cases that's a little bit too much for people to understand and use. And in other cases, there may be people that don't have access to the dashboard. And so providing this option gives them a very easy way to comfortably use it and also kind of continue with the way that they're sharing it so that they can begin to start to use these online tools and not be intimidated by them. Next is related to the first, the item I just talked about, keeping the format to a certain size. It does somewhat restrict, the downside to that is it does somewhat restrict on how much exploration and drill down details can be done within that page. And so partly for that, but also partly because it's just helpful sometimes to have a separate worksheet to be doing the drill down on. We tend to have the drill down into the very far details, leveraging the action items that allow for a menu to be created with a right click that brings people to a different page. And so this is what this is showing, is that really within that dashboard, right-clicking on a particular area, we can drill into the client details, as you can see highlighted in the menu, or drill into employee details. And what this will do is it'll bring them to a separate worksheet, and then they can navigate from there. And so it doesn't impact the nice format of the dashboard. It doesn't impact the ability to print out to a PDF. And it also gives them kind of a clean page to work on, to add columns and rows that perhaps wouldn't fit on the other view. And so if we go to the next section, so this is in that first example I showed, if you were to drill into detail. So let's say they're going from geographic market to more details such as the business or the office. Oftentimes that information will kind of get compressed within the frame in Tableau, and so either you get kind of this compression of columns and rows and it gets really small from a font perspective, or it creates some scroll bars that forces people to kind of scroll left and right, and it's really not necessarily as easy to view and understand. And so, and in this case, there's actually some additional tables that are not necessarily all aligned with the other table that's shown here, and so sometimes those things can get out of sync. And so the option here is to basically create the menu, and what I'm showing at the bottom here is that all of these sections, this first pivot, which is a pretty plain vanilla pivot, but it does provide a lot more detail about the people that make up that information. To the center of that is more of a histogram, another chart, a supplementary chart, as well as a heat map on the right, or a color table. And those are all things that couldn't fit on the dashboard page, but actually provide a lot more relevant information. And using the actions to bring people to a separate page helps improve the comfort level of navigating. And the last piece I want to talk about was our use of Tableau Server, because what we're doing, as I mentioned at the beginning, we've already built out a data warehouse as well as a reporting portal. And so introducing Tableau on its own through the server created sort of two different ways of getting to the information. And so one of the advantages of publishing the content to the server is that we can integrate with our portal. So you see here on the right, there's an example of our reporting portal. There's reports and different interactive applications that are built using other tools, other non-Tableau tools. But this can be the Tableau stuff can be integrated with that. And so what it does is it creates one place for our users to go. They know that they go to a tool called Report It, and every piece of content they need there, whether it's Tableau or something else, or it's a pre-generated PDF, it allows them to go to one place and they can see it. In addition, certainly the scheduling and not having to have people run dashboards and distribute them manually and to run them manually, so certainly leveraging the server enables things to be scheduled and run and distributed very quickly. Security, we would build in security into those dashboards and ensure that only people who have access to view it can view it, and that even within the dashboard, if they were responsible for a particular business or geography, that they're prevented from seeing other businesses and geographies. And so having the content distributed in any other way really is whether it's through an email or through a shared drive on a LAN or something like that, prevents us from applying the security to this information, which is quite confidential in many cases. And most importantly, it does allow us to track who's using the dashboards and when. And so the measurement of the adoption is pretty critical. And so having it on the server is really a critical component to that. So having the server and publishing it to there has really helped to improve the availability of information, as well as being able to track who's using it. So with that, we'll turn it over to questions.